Welcome, everybody. This week, we introduced one of our biggest product updates, my favorite product update so far. It's Dino AI v 2.0. So, when we first launched Dino AI, it was a pretty simple yet effective AI tool where you could create models, you could debug, and now we've gone a lot further. So I'm not going to give any more context than that. But today, you have me, your host, Parker Rogers, and we have Kaustav, our co-CEO, as well as Fabio, our co-CEO. So Kaustav, kick us off.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. Thanks, Parker. Yeah, I'm super excited today to launch this next iteration of Dino AI. So, if I rewind back, we released the first version of Dino AI way back in like January or February last year, and we've been iterating on that, improving the experience of that Copilot experience. But there was something missing. There was always something missing, and I think speaking with lots of users and looking at the way the world is going, we always felt that there is always something acts as a friction when it comes to analytics engineering and coding and development when it comes to analytics engineering that Dino AI didn't have, and which led us to think really hard about how we can actually bring a cursor like experience for data folks and in the data domain. And that's what we are launching today. So I'm super excited. I think we have got some great demos lined up with Fabio and Parker working through that. I'm going to run you through a little bit of the problem statement, where we have gotten to and what's next for us, and then we'll also take questions as we kind of go along. Cool. So, a brief agenda that we want to run through today is what sort of prompted us to think in this direction. What's the solution we've built? What are the use cases, roadmap, pricing, and enterprise readiness? So, we've sort of factored in all of those things in today's presentation, and then we'll kind of go from there. Cool. So, what's the burning problem? So, when I think about it, when we started really thinking about it, one of the key observations we saw is that data teams or budgets are not growing, and that's primarily because that teams are typically being run fairly lean, and but the data work is still increasing. That is not going down. As a result, most organizations are having to do data work with less. Now, there are two ways of what you do when you have to do things less, when you have to do things with less. One is you might as well not do much of the work that needs to be done. Number two is, or your team is really overloaded. And both are really untenable situations, which is why that was one of the key observations we made. The second is that analytics engineering, if you really take a 50,000 feet or a 60,000 feet view, has a steep learning curve. We all love DBT. We know that. We love various different technologies within the SQL framework space, but they all have a steep learning curve. Beyond the 5, 10 experts within the organization, it doesn't scale beyond that in a meaningful and relevant way. And the third piece, I think I have personally felt a lot of times, and I'm sure others have as well, is that 80% of the work is rote work. It's just a lot of low value work. If you have to set up a model, let's say you have a NetSuite model being extracted by Fivetran in your Snowflake warehouse, you have a table with like 100 columns, and you have to rename those 100 columns manually. And it is just meaningless rote work, and nobody's going to document those models. Nobody's going to write tests for those models. As a result, you end up with really good metrics with no real good tests or documentation behind it, because most of the work is literally rote work and low value. So what happens as a result of this is that you have a small team or you don't have budget. You cannot disseminate that knowledge across a larger part of the organization. And on top of that, most of the work that you end up doing is actually low value rote work. What that As a result, we've been thinking really hard is to like, okay, how can we make easy work really easy? Second is so that teams can really focus on what is impactful, what can drive business value, what can drive business growth, what can drive revenue for the business. And lastly, expand the remit of how many people can actually do this development work across an organization. So So when we thought about it, we looked at what is like the current state of the art, and we see like couple of patterns emerge from there. One of the patterns we see is people have their code editor, which is like a VS Code. They might have PyCharm, and what you do is you write code, you copy it to an LLM console like Claude or OpenAI, and there you might have a paid account or might not have a paid account. If you don't have a paid account, the data is being used for training and training purposes. You just don't know. And then whatever is the code generated, you take it to your data warehouse, SQL Workbench, whether it's Snowsight or something else that you are using. You test what is going on, you bring that thing back into VS Code. You might have a dbt power user extension to sort of circumvent the VS Code to data warehouse part, and so on and so forth. But it's just clunky, it just goes on, and it's dead by a thousand paper cuts. And more importantly, the code that you are working on the LLM side has no context of your data, has literally zero context of your data. And most of the LLMs that you work with, they have not been, there is not enough publicly available DBT code that actually can give you really good results. So as a result, to improve your outcomes from an LLM perspective, you have to use as much data context as you can get. So that's one workflow we see people do quite a lot. The other workflow we've seen also people do is use something like a AI first code editor like Cursor or Windsurf, or but they are built really well for software engineering. Software engineering works like amazingly well. Even we use it internally for some of the stuff that we do as well. But again, when it comes to something like a Cursor, it again doesn't have the data context. You can probably try and bring it through an MCP or something to that effect, but again, you have to wait for that MCP server to be available or build it yourself. Even if you have the MCP server, you do not have any guardrails in place. For example, I've spoken with folks who have set up Cursor and or Windsurf and started doing DBT development work, and all of a sudden, the code is running select star statements on petabyte scale warehouses. So you do not really have those guardrails in place, and it's not tailored for analytics engineering. Means you do not have the lineage, you do not have the catalog, you do not have the concept of what, let's say, BI dashboards and things like that you're using. So it doesn't really have that context of analytics engineering, doesn't have SQL fluff, doesn't have all of these things that you need as part of your development environment. So it does circumvent the problem of traveling back and forth between LLM and VS Code, but it doesn't solve the problem of data context, which leads us to what we are launching today, which is how can we actually bring Cursor for data all together in one single place so that you can just go about building and not have to worry about any of the other things. So what are we launching today? We have taken our rock solid IDE that has been in use by hundreds and thousands of users across hundreds of organizations, that is already working really well, and we have added our Dino AI v2 to it so that you are able to do work in code mode, no longer in ask mode. So we are calling it two different modes. So typically, so far, what would have happened is that you would have asked Dino AI to give you an output. You would have taken that output, worked with it, or copied and pasted it somewhere else, etc. What we are doing now is changing the game here to go into code mode. What that means is that on the back of a prompt and things like that you add, Dino AI is now able to generate code for you, generate documentation for you, generate tests for you. And it does that not only just for one model, it can build an entire data pipeline for you as a result. And it has the context of your complete warehouse information schema. Alongside that, it also has sensible guardrails in place so that you are not making unnecessary DBT runs, you are not making unnecessary select star statements on your warehouse. And where we are going with there is that you already have the context of BigQuery, Snowflake, Redshift, Databricks, MotherDuck, DuckDB, ClickHouse, Trino, any of these warehouses that you already can connect to Paradigm now is available as a context for you to do your data development on using Dino AI, which means it eliminates about 99% of your rote work. And what you are left with is focusing on the business logic, focusing on the insights, focusing on what is actually valuable for the business. So I'll stop there because that's all the talking. But I think Fabio has some pretty awesome demos lined up next, followed by Parker, and we're going to take it from there.
And Fabio, before you do that, Kaustav, someone asked in the chat, what's behind the name Dino AI? I also have no idea where Dino AI came from.
Fabio, do you want to go for that?
No, okay, yeah, it's a funny one. So one day we were doing a database migration. So it was a nice Saturday morning, and while we were doing that in Paradime, we're kind of talking, okay, how the AI feature can be enabled, how can it work, what can be a nice mascot, and then just suddenly came out, okay, dinosaurs, I like it. That sounds cool. It's a fine name. It's a great mascot as well. So we couldn't find a better name for it.
I'm good with it. I like it. We don't need to change it. That's what I'm saying.
No, we don't need to. We don't need to.
All right, Fabio, you're up.
Cool, awesome. Well, I'm super excited to be here and show you a little bit around on what we can do with Dino AI and with the V 2.0 as an agent. So I'm a massive fan of Formula One. I'm sure there are some of the call which they are today as well. It's a big week. We have Australia, our first race of the season, and I thought, okay, it would be great to actually do some data modeling on the back of that. So if you see my left panel here, I don't have any project, or rather just a simple project with no data in there. And really what I want to go through is how with Dino AI, we are able to streamline workflows to start really working from the ground up on our DBT project. So I'll click on the left panel here and we'll see the Dino AI state here. And as Kaustav mentioned, we have now two modes, ask mode and code mode. So code mode allows us to ultimately interact with various different tools and functionality that Dino AI exposes to the agent to really streamline development work. So the first thing I wanted to do is I'm just going to add this prompt here, which is I've loaded some data. Can you create a bunch of sources of YAML? I'm just going to go ahead and press enter. So this is where the magic happened. DinoAI is able to access metadata in your Snowflake account. What it means is now we are going to go through the metadata for your databases, find that there's a database for Formula One related data. I can click on site and it's basically asking for a permission to do certain actions, right? Now it's finding that there is a schema called row, and inside there we have a bunch of tables. So at this point, what DinoAI is actually doing is going through all the metadata that we can gather and also checking for our project structure. So that on the fly, what we're able to do is query the metadata, start structuring the sources of the YAML, doing really that kind of like foundation, and I have to say also pretty boring work when we do the DBT development, which is setting up those initial files. It's also a construct that somebody new to DBT has to learn, and with the agent and with DinoAI, what we want to make sure is that DBT development should be accessible to anyone. So what we're doing now, we are just going through all the metadata that we can gather related to those Formula One tables and reload it in our Snowflake database. And when this is complete, the DinoAI agent will generate for us the sources of YAML. In this case, we can see already it has created a file for us. And again, it's asking for a permission. It's like, hey, do you want me to create this file? This is what it looks like. It's sort of like giving us a quick preview. I'm pretty happy with this. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on accept. Now, with all source data, what we sometimes come across is that column names are not really the best. And we want to sort of like do some initial select prep on the data. As we can see, DinoAI is also sort of like giving an example of how we can actually use data, how we can use those tables, how we can start building on top of our sources tables from Snowflake. So what I want to do, on the other hand, I can see this set of columns here. I was able also to get the data type in there, but they're not really nice to read, right? So constructor results ID is only one word. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give it another prompt and say, hey, I'm pretty happy with this, but what I want is to create a set of base model where you just have to go and make the name of the column a bit more readable for my end user. So I'm just going to click enter here. And now what we're doing is, let's say with DinoAI is going here now and just create, first of all, directory where we can actually go ahead and store our SQL file. And then one by one is showing me the preview of each of those files that it's creating with all the renaming in place. So as you can see here, it's renaming constructor ID with the underscore as a requested. It's also doing some interesting aliasing to make sure that the column names are a bit more readable as well. Is using, of course, the source from the dbt construct to access the source data that we connected to. And we're just going to go ahead now and create those initial models within our dbt project. Now, as soon as this is done, we can go and start exploring also some of the data and the output we have here. As you can see, I haven't touched yet any of my files. I haven't typed anything within the files, all through our fantastic chat panel that we have here. So almost done with the initial check that we want to have in place in here. And what we want to do next is we want to go and run, of course, dbt and do our first run just to build those initial tables within our database. So now that this is complete, just click on the terminal, just going to do a simple dbt run here. Now you can see also the agent is also telling us exactly what is done. He went through and built all these dbt model for us right away, formatting them and making sure that we have the right columns in place. I can also use, of course, the Data Explorer to quickly go and do some preview data here to just see very quickly what the status of my tables looks like, what information I have there. So first step is done. If we go through our exploratory now, you can see have a bunch of new models all done right away without us spending any time on it. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on writing commit. So this is another feature of Paradime, which we generate commits using AI. So we're able to read through your files and ultimately generate a commit message, which is something like a bit more human readable than what we normally do, and we don't have to spend time on that. So I'll go ahead and click on commit and push there. So now that it's done, I'll go back to my DinoAI panel, and let's go ahead with our next task, okay? So what I want to do now is I want to create an intermediate model, something that kind of start joining all those tables together for me, and kind of we can then use that to do some potential exploration on the back of that. So just kind of this additional prompts. I want to create an intermediate model which makes use or allows me to understand data across races as well as constructor and the driver standings for the season. Again, just press enter, and here just gonna click on close all for visibility, and let's go ahead with that. So it's now thinking or generating what this structure, this data model structure should look like in here. And as soon as this is ready, we'll see again the agent providing us with the file diff for visualizing what kind of structure is thinking about for this data model, so that we can actually go and run this and make sure that it runs as expected. So it went on, let me just close this. So it joined some data from result, races, circuit, drivers, constructor, and status. It's also bringing in some data from driver standings, doing a bunch of join for us, nicely formatted, so it's easier to read which columns are coming from where. I can click on accept now. And let's say we build this first dbt model that we have here. You can see it's also telling us like, hey, this is all the structure, this is the information that you can gather, and potentially how you can use this model, right? Now, one thing I want to do now is I don't want to create this as a view. So I actually want this model to be created for me as a table, okay? So I can go ahead and just instruct this model to be materialized as a table. I press enter. So now with DinoAI, what we're able to do is to, again, rewrite this file or modify the file so that we can nicely add a configuration so that when we execute this dbt model, it will be materialized as a table in our warehouse. This is the next step we want to do before we go and actually look at what the data looks like and execute this model again somewhere else again. So you can see it's adding now the config materialized tables at the top. I can now click on accept again. And let's say I want to go ahead and execute my model. So just click on the run button. This will execute our model here. And let's see. Okay, looks all good, all great. Model has been executed and it's running. So let's go ahead and explore a little bit of this data. Just going to click on preview data here. Perfect. Here we go. So you have a nice denormalized table with a bunch of columns that we can use to explore our data further if we want to. I think probably the last thing I want to do now is, let's say I want to add some documentation, right? So nobody really write docs. It's a pretty cumbersome process. So I can just go ahead here And I'm going to copy the file name, and I can say, can you create a schema.yaml file with documentation for this model? Okay. And press enter. And what we are also now finally instructing to do is to kind of like close the loop to add some nice documentation for us so that this model is easier for people to read it and understand exactly what it does. All this without us spending time on formatting YAMLs. It's pretty painful process all the time. So like all this, like we've been building already like 7 or 8 DBT models and intermediate models. I haven't touched the code editor at all. I haven't wrote any single line of SQL yet. And still we're able to produce a great quality of code for our user. So you went about adding our schema.yaml with descriptions. It was also saying, okay, well, because it's an intermediate model, I don't expect, and it's a denormalized table, I do not expect to have any not node value for some of those columns. I also went about and adding some basic tests for us. Now that we have completed also this step here, we can go and see what are the instructions, what the agent has returned for us in terms of how the task was ultimately completed. I can go ahead now and do a final thing, which is I want to just create a last commit here and click on commit and push. Awesome. So we've done all this part. Now something I'll be curious as the race is starting pretty soon. Let's go and find out who were the team that won the most in the last 10 years. So I can just go ahead and say, can you create a model in my Paradime Scratch folder to get the team that won the most in the last 10 years in the Australian GP. Okay, let's go and let's do the last thing we want to do. Let's see if we can export the model and the data a bit more. So the table has been already built in our database, so the table should be accessible for us. And if I just now go here and see this is the query that was generated for us. Now, some people don't know Paradigm Scratch is a way for you to explore data directly in Paradigm. I mean that the file stays there, it's not get tracked. You can do all the stuff you want with it. You can just explore as much as you don't lose the file. It's always going to be there for you, but it's not really a model itself that is going to be created in your database. Now, what about, okay, this is a SQL file that we created. Let's go here and let's try and see preview data. Awesome. Well, I'm a massive Ferrari fan, so it kind of makes me happy so that we're on top of the list in 10 years. Plus, if Hamilton is there this year, we have probably a better chance we haven't won the world championship in ages. But here you go, how we went in 15 minutes all the way from no data, or rather no DBT model at all, creating our sources, creating some documentation, and really interact in a very natural way so that whether I'm an expert DBT user or not, I'm still able to get to a pretty beautiful and strong outcome to understand more about the data that I have in my database.
And Fabio, we got a couple questions.
Sure.
Can we ask Dino AI to run models from the chat window?
Very good question. So it is something the team is already working on to start extending even more the capabilities of what the Dino AI agent can interact with as part of the code ID and the environment that we provide.
And even when that feature does exist, I'm assuming that it's going to be a similar option that says, would you like us to run this? So it's
Exactly.
not just going to run things in your data warehouse without you first confirming it. Nothing's going to be materialized without your knowledge.
Totally. And this goes back to what Kaustav mentioned about guardrails and how we build the system to make sure that there are certain things that we want the Dino agent to be completely going on its own and building things for us, because we want to also make sure that you have that speed of development. But for certain functionality, we want to make sure that the human is in the loop all the time.
Yep. So up to the point until Fabio ran DBT run, Dino AI was simply writing code and putting it in SQL files and YAML files. Nothing was being executed beyond that. And the next question from Jay is, I didn't see you following the DBT convention of having CTEs with select star from tables at the top. I'm assuming
But
that's a preference that you can put in the prompt, but perhaps your staging files have that.
That's correct. So there are two sides of it, and it's a great question actually, because one is, yes, you can be very explicit in the prompt, but also Paradigm support Dino rules, which means that for any sort of like SQL standard preference that you want to enforce, where the agent is auto-generating code, you will be able to actually set the Dino rules within Paradigm, which means will be part of the standard context that the agent will have. Things like comma before, comma after, what kind of capitalization in terms of styling. I personally prefer all lowercase, but some people, of course, they prefer uppercase for keyword. All these kind of configuration, you'll be able to set them in your Dino rules as you would for the ask mode, and then those will be enforced.
And I just added a link to the Dino rules documentation. So whatever you configure in that Dino rules file, that will be the Dino AI will reference that whenever you're using the code mode or the ask mode.
Correct. That's correct.
Okay. And then Jay's third question. Yeah, similar to that. It's a stylistic preference that you can make clear in your Dino rules file. And also just in your prompt, similar to any LLMs, you can be very specific about what you want, what you don't want, the structure of your code. You can even say, I want to follow a certain type of modeling where I have like, is it bronze, silver, gold cow stuff? I was just reading about that from your prompts. Yeah, so you can be very descriptive of how you want your folders to be organized, all that.
Exactly.
Yeah, as Jay says, commas in the front is a preference, and you can, whatever you set in Dino rules is going to be respected by Dino agent as it generates code. Awesome. Well, I think everyone saw like how easy it's now becoming to actually do your analytics work as you kind of go along. It's most of the stuff that you spend time on, it's essentially getting disintermediated away. I think I'll take one of the questions on the specific LLM. So we are working with a combination of Claude 3.5 and 3.7 under the hood at the moment. So those are the LLMs we are using at the moment. We plan to expand that into other LLMs to optimize the end user experience. But and to your question, Vanlin, which sort of leads me into my next slide, because I think it's all great to be able to prompt, but I think as we have seen from our experience, it's always useful to get started with prompts that we have found to be working, that we have seen to be working in the wild. So with that being said, what we are also launching today is a completely separate website called dataprompts.com. So it's going to be a prompt library for data work, and so that you have high quality publicly available prompts available for all your data work. And so if you go to the website today, you'll find it's already loaded with quite a few prompts to start off with. But at some point during this week, we are also going to open it up for contributions from anyone who is working in the area of data as well. So we're going to open it up for public contributions as well. So it's going to be a living, breathing system, which all of us can actually take help of to give ourselves the most high quality prompts out there to do and get started and do our data work. So not only we are launching Dino AI version 2 today, but we are also launching Prompt Library as a completely publicly available resource. Cool, good stuff. Okay, what's on the next slide is, I think the next slide is all about, everyone will eventually get to that question anyways, which is pricing. How are you going to price this thing? What is going to cost? But before I sort of go there, I wanted to share with you like what's coming next, what's happening from a roadmap perspective. So as you can see, data warehouse is one part of your data, but there is also additional context that is available in your ticketing systems, in your documentations, diagrams, through collaboration, etc. So all of those contexts will become available to you as we expand the remit of Dino AI. So you can get even more context available as part of your data development process. The other side of it, and context usage, expanding context on usage, is more on the input side. So far we have seen is that we are outputting code, we are outputting YAML files and things like that. We can also, what we will be expanding into is beyond code. So we'll be expanding into not only code, but maybe documents, maybe Notion docs, or dashboards, or column level lineage, whatever that might be. But ultimately, you're producing work. Work code is one part of your work output. So we will be expanding the output. The third piece here is adapting the Dino AI experience to business needs. So from our experience, different organizations operate with different levels of, whether it is security, whether it is preferences, whether it is best practices, processes, etc. And that's very unique to those organizations. So we want to be able to make sure that what you get from Dino AI is actually adapted to your organization and to your business needs, and is not a one shop, one size fits all sort of a solution. Okay. Then next slide is pricing. So this is, considered this as beta pricing. So what's gonna happen when we release this pricing is that we're gonna be dropping the price of the code IDE on a base tier to $25 per user per month. It's currently $60 per user per month. So we're gonna dropping that price. 20% discount will be on annual subscriptions. But as a result of that, we will have also 3 different tiers from a Dino AI perspective that you can load up with credits. So there will be 3 tiers: Spark, Flow, and Vibe. Vibe is you're really vibing, you're really using Dino AI every day for your analytics work. And Flow is when you are using it a few times a week. And Spark is ideal if you are trialing it for AI-driven development. For existing customers that are already using Paradime, you will be automatically on added 5 million credits would be added to your account automatically. So that would take it to $55 per user per month, which is still, I mean, you are most likely paying much less than that already. So you are not losing out on anything. So we have priced it that way that existing customers don't lose out on anything. And as you said, vibe coding is real. We got to go and use all those 10 million credits and make AI part of your day-to-day data workflows. But yeah, so this is our initial guess, let's say, of how we are thinking of pricing. But again, this is beta pricing. We're going to be constantly iterating on that based on user feedback, based on what our customers think, and sort of go from there. The final part before we go into Q&A is around enterprise readiness. So I think this is a very important thing to sort of think about when it comes to rolling something like Dino AI out into the organization. So we are already SOC 2. We already have gone through SOC 2 type 2 audits and things like that. So that's already done. We are going through the ISO 42001 as well, which in Europe is Euro's version of AI management best practices. We have zero data retention agreements already signed with Anthropic, which means none of the stuff that we use Dino AI for is used in any systems, or any data retention is in place. And finally, we are also updating our terms of service so that ultimately we have no ownership in your input or in your output. So ultimately, what you input as a prompt, what you get output as code, you retain complete ownership of that. We've got nothing to do with it. So that's how we are thinking about it from an enterprise readiness perspective, so that organizations can use it, while at the same time they can keep their security and compliance teams happy in the process. So yeah, so that's pretty much what we had in mind. I think in the coming days and weeks, we are going to be doing a lot more demos around taking specific in use cases and taking specific inputs, and see how we can actually keep improving the system and work through that. It's going to be released next week. It's in private preview at the moment, but it is going to become available from next week onwards to everyone to already start trialing on the new pricing plans and things like that. Existing users will also be able to have the credits loaded on their account so that they can get started already. And yeah, and this is really a game changer when it comes to how we go about doing data work and data development. And we will keep on iterating on that and keep improving the user experience as we kind of go along. But yeah, I think it's a good time to take some questions as well.
Cool.
Awesome. All right, let's see some of these. Kaustav, do you have any best practices about prompts? Perfect segue.
Perfect. Great question. I think what we have seen is that, so we've been curating prompts on our dataprompts.com URL, but I think one of the things that we have seen so far is that if you keep the tasks very specific to what you want, then you get like really good outcomes. And it doesn't have to be really, really specific, but for example, you keep code generation, so like how Fabio was doing it, which is like generate the sources first, then build the models, do the documentation. So if you keep things like as if you would do in real life, I think that creates the best outcomes so far. Second is try to be a little bit more specific, so that like if you want a particular table to be taken into account, have like normal English words sort of explaining what the table looks like, and then the information schema picks that up, and so on and so forth. So it's, and you'll see as you kind of go along, is that instead of having really broad prompt for a lot of things to be done in single place, having it in small sizable chunks, I think creates the best outcome. Like write up all the tests for within a particular folder, or take a model and create the sources.yaml file for it, or take these folder and create a mart on the back of staging and intermediate tables and things like that. So that creates the best outcome for now.
And are we using any specific LLMs under the hood?
Yeah, we are using Claude under the hood, and we are kind of between Claude 3.5 and 3.7 at the moment. Funny enough, 3.7 seems to talk a lot, which can be quite disengaging at times when you are trying to work. So that's something we found. It's got a character and a mind of its own, sort of. But yeah, we are primarily using Anthropic LLMs under the hood.
Do you see this tool as primarily for exploratory analysis early on when you access new data?
I think that's a great question. I think you can use it very effectively for exploratory analysis in the early phases. So let's say you have a table that has landed with 50 columns in your warehouse from a product team, and to get some of the few starting models get up and running in a couple of minutes, and then you are spending time in the exploration. I think that is really powerful and time saving, because now you're focusing on the outcomes. You're not focusing on how do I write the SQL or the code and things like that you can finesse later on as you kind of go along. So definitely. The other part I think you can use this is that when you have to do ad hoc incremental work, it's very powerful. If you have to add, let's say somebody has added 3 columns to a sources table, and to actually make it flow through across sources and then intermediates and marts, it's really powerful with documentation and tests built in. That is going to be game changing. That's going to be like seconds. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very common scenario. I think when we develop DBT, that you start with a schema which has 5 tables and then it grows, right? And how do you keep that updated? Well, the DinoAI agent is super powerful that on reading that file, comparing with what is available in that schema within your database, and then do the addition or deletion as required without you having to deal with YAML formatting, which is super powerful to make sure that you can focus on the business logic rather than code maintenance.
And last question is, can you add specific files or folders for Dino AI to pay attention to?
Yeah,
Yes. So
yeah.
it totally understands the structure and content of your data warehouse. So if there's already materialized tables and views and they're structured in specific folders, Dino AI understands that. So you can just say, hey, I want to create another intermediate model in this folder that's related to this, and it'll obey. Okay. And question for you, Kaustav. Do you think DBT Cloud will eventually build this feature?
Great question. So I think there it's a loaded one, so I'll try to answer it properly. So I think if they had to think about something in these lines, they should have done it by now. What I've found is that they're trying to do the bare minimum in when it comes to AI. In my opinion, they're trying to sort of understand what is out there in the market, and they're being really slow around this. And I've seen this sort of play around on the semantic layer side of it and things like that. Ultimately, I think what I am seeing is that end users need to move fast with a small team, and we need to work towards that. When it comes to how DBT Cloud is going to think about it, I think I think they have typically been behind on the tech curve when it comes to their platform. So I do not expect that to change also in the near future.
And we've kind of shown where we recommend using the new code mode of Dino AI.
Mhm.
Where do you think teams shouldn't use it?
That's a great question. I think I think you shouldn't use it when you are trying to deeply analyze a complex problem. So let's say very you're trying to figure out something like a critical lead scoring algorithm or something like that that requires a lot of really strong and deep thinking, joining multiple different data sets and things like that. I think you should get the initial part of the code done, but after that you should spend time in the business logic behind it, in the data analysis, exploratory analysis, that sort of stuff. I think you shouldn't try to get those things done through Dino, because that requires your creativity, requires specialist understanding of the data and things like that. I think that's where I think you should still use a little bit of your secret sauce, of you being an analyst or someone who has unique insight. Use Dino AI.
And what guardrails do we have in place to ensure that Dino AI is accurate and has integrity?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Some of the things that we've done is few things. Number one is that don't make unnecessary requests into your data warehouse when you don't need to. If all of the stuff that can be inferred from code, you should keep doing that, so that you keep your warehouse cost and back and forth with the warehouse at a minimum. The second is make sure you look at the right files and folders within your repository, so that you have the right context in place. There is no point looking at some of the files that are generated, let's say dbt logs or something like that, is just a lot of noise in there. And lastly, it's built around the fact that you cannot run unnecessarily dbt runs and things like that. So in the next iteration of it, when the tool running dbt code from Dino comes along, that you run things as and when it's needed. You do not automatically run dbt run in your data warehouse, because again, just creating a lot of noisy tables.
All right. I think those are all the questions for today. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And we will be creating a ton of content around our new Dino AI, from videos to templates to prompts that you can use to make sure you're getting the results that you want. And Fabio, Kaustav, is there anything you want to add before we sign off?
Yeah, I think we got one last question, maybe.
All right.
Fabio, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So we did some internal benchmarking around what ultimately gave us the best flexibility in terms of the response and the quality of those responses. What we saw is that with Cloud, because we have both Ask and Code mode, we got the best result for both those experiences. Ultimately, Code mode is part of the way you do your DBT development or development in Paradime, but you also want to make sure that you have like pretty seamless interaction and within the Ask mode. So we saw that Cloud compared with OpenAI gave us overall much better results on that.
Yeah, I think I saw also like more human responses from there, and that improved the overall experience.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We will send out a recording of this, and we will be doing another one next week. Kaustav, is that right?
We'll be doing another one next week. So
All right. This is our new thing. So every week, whether there's a big product update or we just want to go over some of the fundamentals of what's on the Paradigm platform, we'll be doing this weekly.
cool, awesome. Thanks, Parker, and thanks, Fabio, for demoing. And great to see you all here. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye bye.